There was a moment, one singular moment, that turned everything I knew on its head. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no shocking confrontations. No, it was far subtler than that. It was like a small crack in the surface of a seemingly perfect life, something so subtle I didn't realize it was happening until I was already deep into it. It was the middle of a quiet Friday evening, and I was at home, going over some emails from work while the clock ticked towards midnight. I wasn't expecting any surprises. I had a routine, an almost predictable rhythm to my life. But that night, things were different. Things were too quiet. It had been weeks since anything felt right between us. Weeks of silence, of unspoken words hanging between me and my wife, but I didn't know why. She was always busy, and I told myself that it was just the stress of her new project at work. She seemed distracted, but she always had an excuse. I'm just tired, or I'm handling something important. But tonight, there was something else in the air. It wasn't the usual stress-induced distance. It was colder, somehow, like something was pulling her away from me, step by step, until she wasn't the woman I married anymore. The woman who used to stay up late talking about everything and nothing, who used to laugh at my dumb jokes. Now, I barely recognized her. She was downstairs in the living room, sitting on the couch, her laptop open, but she wasn't working. She wasn't even really looking at it. I could tell because she kept glancing over at me. Quick, almost imperceptible glances that I pretended not to notice. It was late. I had no business being up, but I couldn't sleep, not with the strange heaviness in the air. I didn't want to confront her. Not yet. But something in me, some nagging instinct, told me I needed to. I stood up from my desk, stretching my legs, and decided to take the first step. "Hey," I said softly, leaning against the doorway. I was trying to sound casual, like this was just a regular night, but my voice came out a little too tense, a little too wary. She didn't respond immediately. I watched as she clicked on something on her screen, her face expressionless. After a long moment, she looked up at me, her lips curling into a half-smile. It was strange, the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she replied, her voice distant. I waited, trying to figure out what to say, but the words wouldn't come. How could I ask her? How could I confront her when I didn't even know what was going on? The silence stretched between us, growing thicker by the second. I was about to speak again, to say something, anything, when the doorbell rang. It was an odd time for anyone to be visiting. No one came over this late, and we didn't have any close friends or family who would drop by unannounced. But there it was, the sharp ring of the bell cutting through the thick quiet of the house. My heart skipped a beat. Helen looked at me, her expression unreadable. She didn't move at first, just sat there, staring at me with that same strange, distant gaze. "I'll get it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, more out of instinct than anything. But before I could take another step, she stood up. "I'll get it," she said, almost too quickly, the words sharp and hurried. She didn't wait for my response. Without another glance at me, she walked past, heading toward the front door. I stood there for a second, frozen, a strange unease creeping up my spine. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it deep in my gut. I watched as she opened the door, and there stood a man. I didn't recognize him at first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a deep voice that made my skin crawl. He said something to her, something I couldn't hear from where I stood. Helen's face, her expression, shifted just for a moment. There was a fleeting softness in her eyes that I had never seen when she looked at me anymore. I didn't move. I stayed by the stairs, watching, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who was this man? Why was he here at this hour? Why didn't Helen seem surprised to see him? The man said something else, and then, for the first time, I saw Helen smile. Not a polite smile, not the one she gave to me when I asked about her day, but a real, genuine smile. And it made my stomach drop. The smile, the way she looked at him, was something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just friendly. It wasn't casual. It was something deeper, something more intimate. My mind spun. I should have turned around. I should have walked away, but I was rooted to the spot, my body betraying me as I watched them interact. It was like I was seeing a side of her I didn't know existed. She stepped aside, letting the man into the house. I stood there in silence, the pit in my stomach growing colder by the second. What was going on? What had I missed? I didn't know how long I stood there, but it was long enough for me to realize that the life I thought I had was beginning to crumble, piece by piece, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. I wasn't sure I even wanted to. The door shut behind them, and I could hear voices, low and muffled. It was almost like a secret being whispered just out of reach. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My mind was a storm of confusion and disbelief. What had just happened? I turned slowly, walking back to my office, my legs heavy, my thoughts in disarray. Something was happening, something I hadn't prepared for, something that had been building under the surface for God knows how long. And now, I was stuck in the middle of it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I told myself to calm down. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, Helen had always been independent, always had a life outside of our marriage. But that smile, when she looked at that man, it lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, that soft, intimate smile. The sound of their voices downstairs faded in and out, muffled, but it wasn't enough to drown out the gnawing feeling in my chest. I couldn't get rid of it. And worse, I couldn't ignore the thoughts swirling in my head. Who was he? Why was he here? I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation. Maybe he was a work colleague. Maybe they were just catching up. But the way she had looked at him, that wasn't something you did with a colleague. That was the look you give someone you knew, someone you shared something with. The clock ticked on, and I tried to distract myself, but every minute felt like an hour. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. Slowly, I stood up, each step toward the stairs feeling heavier than the last. My heart was pounding in my chest as I moved down the hallway toward the living room. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, listening. Their voices were clearer now, and I could make out bits of their conversation. It wasn't anything unusual, just small talk, it seemed. But then I heard something that made me freeze in place. Helen was laughing. Not a casual laugh, but one that was different. It was warm, genuine, like the kind of laugh you share with someone you're comfortable with, someone you trust. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I felt a coldness creep over me as I leaned against the wall, my body tense, my mind racing. Was this what was happening? Was my wife, falling for someone else? I couldn't deny the sinking feeling in my stomach. There was no denying it now. The signs were all there. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to march down there and demand answers. But something inside me held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was doubt. But I couldn't bring myself to face her, not yet. As I stood there, listening, a thought crossed my mind. What if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head? But I knew deep down it wasn't. I wasn't imagining the change in her. I wasn't imagining the way she'd looked at that man. There was something more going on here, something I wasn't ready to accept. I stayed where I was, hidden in the shadows, feeling like an outsider in my own home. And then, I heard it, something that made my blood run cold. Helen's voice, lower now, almost a whisper. You know, I've missed this. I didn't need to hear more. I knew exactly what she meant. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't just hearing a conversation. I was hearing a secret. I couldn't move. The words, I've missed this, hung in the air like an explosion I wasn't ready to hear. I wanted to scream, to rush down the stairs, to confront Helen, to demand the truth. But I stayed frozen in place, heart pounding, every nerve in my body on high alert. I should have gone downstairs. I should have done something. But I couldn't. It was like my feet were glued to the floor, paralyzed by the realization that what I had feared, what I had felt deep in my gut, was now staring me in the face. Helen was hiding something. And it wasn't just about her being distant lately. It was about something much bigger. Something deeper. The voices downstairs continued, muffled but clear enough for me to pick out fragments of their conversation. The man, whoever he was, hadn't left yet. I could tell because every time he spoke, Helen seemed to hang on his every word. She wasn't just listening. She was responding, in a way that made my chest tighten, like she was feeling something. It wasn't just a casual exchange anymore. My hands were trembling by this point, and I gripped the railing tightly to steady myself. I could hear her laugh again, that warm, knowing laugh. And this time, it wasn't like a distant memory. It wasn't the laugh of a woman who had just met someone. It was the laugh of someone who knew him, really knew him. Someone who had history with him. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. How long had this been going on? How long had I been in the dark, completely oblivious to the growing distance between Helen and me? A part of me wanted to rush down there, to put an end to this madness, to shout at her to stop lying. But another part of me didn't want to hear any more. Because deep down, I knew what would come next. She would confess. She would tell me the truth. And I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. The conversation below shifted, and I heard the man's voice again. This time, he was closer to her. Too close. You still think about it, don't you? He said, his tone low, almost intimate. There was a pause before Helen answered. I think about it all the time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never stopped. I felt the ground beneath me shift. My mind was reeling, my pulse racing. I knew what they were talking about now. It wasn't just a friendship, wasn't just a random encounter. No, it was something else, something far more dangerous. They were talking about a past that I didn't even know existed. A flood of questions rushed into my head. Who was this man to her? What had they shared? Was I really so blind that I missed all of this? The anger was building, hot and sharp, but it was mixed with something else, a deep, aching sadness. I couldn't believe it. After everything we had been through, after all the time we spent together, how could she be keeping this from me? How could she be so deceptive? I stayed where I was, heart pounding, mind spinning. I wanted to run downstairs, to confront her, but something stopped me again. Maybe it was the fear that if I confronted her now, I would never get the full picture. Maybe it was the fear of hearing words I wasn't ready for. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stepped into that room, if I spoke now, I would be entering a world I couldn't control. A world where everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, would crumble. And that was terrifying. It was impossible to stay still any longer. The tension, the anxiety, the dread, it was all boiling inside me, pushing me toward the stairs. But every step I took felt like I was walking toward a truth I didn't want to face. My heart raced faster, louder, as I forced myself to move. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to wait until I was ready for whatever they were hiding. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I needed to know. I moved down the stairs slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. But with each step, I could hear their voices more clearly. It was like they were just a room away, close enough for me to reach out and shatter the fragile wall of silence between us. Helen's laughter again. And then, a brief pause before the man spoke. You never told him, did you? His words cut through the air like a knife. I froze, gripping the banister tightly. My breath caught in my throat. Who was he talking about? Him, I thought. Was he talking about me? My mind scrambled for answers, but the answers felt just out of reach, like they were locked behind a door I couldn't open. Helen's voice responded, quieter now. No, I never did. I never could. It would have ruined everything. What would have ruined everything? My heart pounded as I listened. I was hanging on every word, unable to tear myself away. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued, and for a brief moment, I almost thought she was about to say something that would break the dam wide open. I didn't want to hurt him, she whispered. I didn't know if I could take much more. The realization hit me hard, like a flood crashing through a dam. She was hiding something. Something so big that she hadn't even told me. But who was this man to her? I stepped closer to the bottom of the stairs, barely breathing, every muscle tensed in anticipation. I had to know the truth. But then, the man spoke again, and his next words made my blood run cold. You think he'll ever forgive you? Helen didn't respond immediately. The silence between them felt suffocating. I could hear the weight of her hesitation, the way she was avoiding answering. Finally, she spoke, but her words were laced with something I couldn't put my finger on. A sadness? A resignation? I don't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I could forgive myself. That was it. That was the moment that changed everything. The final thread of my sanity snapped. What did she mean by that? Before I could make sense of her words, the man's voice cut through again, but this time, there was something more to it. Something darker, almost dangerous. You never told him the truth about that night, did you? His voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. Helen's voice wavered slightly. I couldn't. I didn't know how. I was scared. I still am. Scared. I stood there in shock, the words spinning in my mind like a broken record. What night? What was she talking about? What truth? I didn't know what to do anymore. My mind was racing, but every piece of the puzzle I was trying to put together didn't fit. There were too many gaps, too many unanswered questions. And the more I heard, the more I realized I didn't know who Helen was anymore. The woman I thought I knew was slipping away from me, revealing a side of herself I had never seen, one that was hidden beneath layers of lies. My legs were shaky now, my hands cold. I couldn't stay in this limbo. I couldn't keep listening to this mystery unfold in front of me without taking action. But I didn't know what action I could take. What was left to save? I had to face her. I had to confront her. I had to know what she'd been hiding all this time. I turned the corner, my footsteps barely making a sound as I approached the living room. But before I could take another step, I saw them. Helen was sitting on the couch, her back slightly turned toward me, and the man, who I now recognized as someone from her past, was sitting on the edge, too close. His hand rested on her arm, a touch that should have meant nothing, but in that moment, it meant everything. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. I stepped into the room, and the air between us went cold. Helen's eyes widened as she saw me standing there. For the first time all night, her face gave nothing away. No guilt, no fear, just nothing. But I wasn't ready for what came next. The room went still. The world outside seemed to fade as I stood there, staring at the two of them. Helen didn't move. Her eyes were locked on mine, but her face gave nothing away. No surprise, no guilt, nothing. She just sat there, that same detached expression I had seen in her earlier behavior. The man beside her, his hand still on her arm, finally spoke. "You should probably leave," he said, his tone smooth but carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Arrogance, maybe? Defensiveness? I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, trying to process what was happening. What had just happened? What was this? Helen finally spoke, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Fear? Regret? Adrian. She started, but then stopped. Her voice was quieter than usual, like she didn't know how to continue, how to explain. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted answers, real answers, but I was so overwhelmed that I could barely form the words. All I could manage was, "Who is he, Helen?" The question was simple, but it felt like a weight lifting from my chest. The man didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at Helen, as if waiting for her to speak. Helen's eyes darted between him and me. Then she exhaled slowly, her voice barely audible. "Adrian, please. We need to talk." The man stood up slowly, brushing his pants down, as if he was about to leave. He looked at me once more, his gaze cold and calculating. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, before heading toward the door. I didn't move. I didn't trust myself to speak at first. As soon as he left, I turned to Helen. I could see her fingers trembling, just slightly, as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her usual composure was gone. "Who is he, Helen?" I repeated, my voice rising a little, the anger bubbling to the surface now. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer at all. But then, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "His name is James." Wait. She stopped herself. I could see the way her mind was racing, trying to figure out how much to say, how much to reveal. I waited, my heart pounding, my mind spinning with a million thoughts. "We had a past, Adrian," she said quietly. "A long time ago, before you and I met." I felt like the room was spinning. A past? What past? The weight of her words hit me, and I couldn't process it fast enough. What kind of past was she talking about? And why hadn't she told me about it? I couldn't stay silent any longer. "What happened between you two?" I demanded, my voice shaking now. The anger was too much, and I felt like I was losing control of my emotions. Helen looked down at her hands for a moment, her face tight with emotion. "It was before you," she repeated, "but I never really got over it." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Never really got over it. What the hell did that mean? I took a step closer to her, my voice low but filled with frustration. "Why didn't you tell me? Why keep this from me all these years?" She winced at the accusation in my voice, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she ran a hand through her hair and sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her secret had finally crushed her. "I didn't know how to," she whispered, barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you, and I didn't think it would ever come up again." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "You didn't think it would ever come up again? He's here now, Helen. You're hiding something from me, and I need to know what it is." She bit her lip, her eyes darting away from mine. I could see the conflict in her expression. She was torn, and I could almost feel the guilt radiating off her. Then, She spoke again, and her next words shattered everything I thought I knew. Helen's eyes met mine for the first time since I had asked the question. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence between us felt like a pressure, thick and suffocating. I stood there, waiting, desperately hoping she would finally say something that made sense. Her lips trembled as if she was trying to find the right words. And then, almost as if she was making a decision, she spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. "You want to know the truth, Adrian? You want to know why he's here?" I nodded, my chest tightening. Every part of me was screaming for her to be honest, for her to finally tell me what was going on. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, it seemed like she was looking right through me. Then she slowly exhaled, as if releasing something she had been holding onto for years. "I had an affair with him," she said, her words hanging in the air between us, heavy and sharp. I froze. The words felt like a punch to the gut, and I didn't know how to react. The world around me seemed to slow, and I struggled to process what she had just said. An affair? With him? My mind was spinning, and everything in my life, everything I thought I knew, suddenly felt like a lie. "I never meant for it to happen," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "It was years ago, before we even met. It was one of those things that I buried, that I convinced myself was over. I thought I could move on, that it wouldn't matter anymore. But it does." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know why she hadn't told me, why she kept this secret for so long. But I couldn't. I was too stunned to speak. Helen looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I was ashamed of what happened, and I thought if I kept it hidden, it would just disappear." The room felt cold. The walls were closing in on me. My mind raced, trying to process everything she had just said. I wanted to believe her, but the betrayal was too deep. How could I have been so blind? How had I missed all the signs? "Why now?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Why is he back? After all these years, why is he in our lives again?" She bit her lip, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He's been trying to reach me for months," she confessed. "He wanted closure. And I didn't know how to say no. I thought maybe I could finally put it to rest." The weight of her confession hung heavy between us. I wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but all I could do was stand there, feeling the ground beneath me shift. This wasn't the woman I had married. The trust that had taken years to build was crumbling in an instant. Helen stepped toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Adrian, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. But I can't change what happened." The words hit me harder than I expected. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. I could barely breathe. The air felt thick in my lungs, and the weight of Helen's words pressed down on me like a stone. "An affair," I repeated, almost to myself, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it real. But even hearing the words didn't make sense. How could I not have known? How had I missed this all these years? Helen was standing there, still trying to meet my gaze, but I couldn't look at her. Not right now. I needed space, something to hold on to, because the ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling. I turned away, my mind racing. How could she have kept this from me? What else had she hidden? I needed to think. I needed to process. But how could I? The woman I trusted, the one I had built my life with, was a stranger to me now. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. That person had been replaced by someone who could hide such a devastating truth. "Adrian," Helen's voice broke through my thoughts, but I couldn't bring myself to face her. "Please, just let me explain." Explain? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I spun back toward her, my anger rising. "How do you explain something like that, Helen? How do you explain throwing everything away?" Her eyes welled up, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. I was too consumed by the chaos inside me. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake, a huge mistake. But it happened, and I couldn't go back and undo it. I thought I could forget it, that it wouldn't matter anymore. But I was wrong." I could see the guilt in her face, but it didn't matter. The trust was shattered. I was standing in front of a woman who had lied to me, kept something so significant from me. And for what? To protect herself? To protect us? Why him? I demanded, my voice trembling now. Why him? Why not anyone else? Why keep this secret for so long? What did he mean to you? Her silence was all the answer I needed. It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. This had been something deeper, something that had left a mark on her that she couldn't erase. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered. I was scared of losing you. I thought if I kept it hidden, maybe we could move on. Maybe we could just pretend it didn't happen. I felt the bitterness rise in me, and I took a step back. Pretend? You thought you could just pretend like it never happened? The disbelief in my voice cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Helen stepped toward me, reaching out, but I flinched, stepping away. Please, don't touch me, I said, my voice sharp. You lost that right the moment you kept this from me. I could see the hurt in her eyes, the tears now freely falling down her cheeks. But I didn't feel sympathy. I couldn't. Not when everything I knew had been turned upside down. Not when I was standing here, feeling like the foundation of my life had just crumbled into dust. Adrian, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I love you. I never stopped loving you. The words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt empty. The love I had thought we shared seemed fragile now, like it had been built on lies. How could I ever look at her the same way again? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed answers, but I wasn't sure I could trust anything she said anymore. What about him, Helen? What about James? What's going on now? She hesitated, looking away. He's just a part of my past, Adrian. I told him I couldn't see him anymore. I told him to leave. But he won't. He's persistent. He wants me back, and I don't know what to do. The words hit me like a cold slap. He wants you back? I repeated, my voice breaking with the sting of her admission. So this isn't over, is it? Helen looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't meet her gaze anymore. I didn't know what was real anymore. I had trusted her with everything, and she had kept this secret from me. I thought we were building something, but now I wasn't sure we ever had anything solid at all. I don't know what I want anymore, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't know. And just like that, I realized how much I didn't know. How much of our relationship had been built on half-truths and secrets. The feeling of betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, and I didn't know if I could come back from this. The silence stretched between us, unbearable and thick. I stood there, numb, struggling to process everything that had just unfolded. Helen was looking at me, her eyes full of regret and pain, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not yet. The hurt was too fresh, too raw. But as the seconds ticked by, something strange happened. I didn't feel anger anymore. Not in the way I had before. The fury, the betrayal, they were still there, buried deep beneath the surface, but I realized something. I didn't want to be consumed by it. I couldn't let it destroy everything. Not when there was still something worth saving. Not when we were still worth saving. Helen wiped her tears away, her voice barely a whisper. Adrian, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in what felt like forever. She was still the woman I had married, the woman I loved, but she was also someone who had made mistakes, someone who had hurt me. I didn't have all the answers, and maybe I never would. But for the first time in what felt like ages, I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward, taking her hands in mine. She looked up at me, surprised, but I didn't let go. Helen, I said, my voice steady. I don't know where we go from here, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to fight for us. The weight in the air seemed to lift slightly. The tension between us hadn't disappeared, but the distance had shrunk just enough for me to feel the possibility of something new, something real. I don't expect things to magically go back to normal. I continued, my grip tightening ever so slightly. But we can't keep living in the past. We both have to be willing to face what happened and move forward. Her tears slowed, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. I'm ready, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. And in that moment, I knew. It wouldn't be easy. There would be work to do, healing that needed to happen. But we still had time. We still had each other. We weren't perfect. We had made mistakes, and we would make more. But we could rebuild. Slowly, carefully, piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to the love we had once shared. With a deep breath, I pulled her into a hug, holding her close. No words were needed. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I believed in the possibility of a fresh start. It wasn't the ending I had imagined. It wasn't the story I had expected. But it was our story, and it was still being written.